Steph, why don't you think you were able to find any flow, and when that was the case, what are you trying to do to jumpstart things, maybe on the defense?
Well, it's hard for us to find flow when there's a foul call every 10 seconds. I mean, it just really is. And when they're at the free throw line, we can't get up and down the floor, and that's a challenge. They were much more aggressive and physical defensively, we didn't counter that with our off-ball actions or with our back cuts. So they took us out of our comfort zone. I mean, offense is about rhythm, it's about timing, it's about spacing. We allowed them to do that.
That wasn't just a case of a coach griping about a few missed calls. That was the soundtrack to a robbery in progress. 4 days now, the entire WNBA world has been dissecting the crime scene of Game 3 between the Indiana Fever and the Las Vegas Aces. You saw it. The phantom fouls, the ignored challenges, the momentum ripped away by a whistle that felt less like officiating and more like a hit job. But here's the twist. What if the real story isn't the one they wanted you to see? What if the league's desperate attempt to protect their golden team triggered the very backlash they never expected? Tonight, we're not just talking about a rigged game. We're exposing how the WNBA's alleged malpractice blew up in their faces. Because in trying to erase one team, they accidentally unleashed a superstar. This is the untold story of how Lexie Hull, playing through unbearable pain, didn't just have the game of her career. She ripped the mask off the entire system. And that's why we're here. We're a community of narrative analysts, and this is the type of deep dive breakdown we live for. So, if you know the story behind the story is what really matters, hit that like button. A small click, but a massive signal that we're locked in. All right, let's dive in. To understand how a hero was forged, you first have to understand the fire she was thrown into. Game 3 wasn't basketball in the traditional sense. It was a pressure cooker. The Fever, on their home floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, were playing like a team clinging to its season. They built leads. They defended with suffocating intensity. For a moment, it looked like the defending champs were staggering. And then came the whistles. A phantom foul on Aaliyah Boston. A perfectly clean defensive stand by Lexie Hull, called illegal. Suddenly, an offensive screen out of nowhere. Again and again, just as Indiana found rhythm, the whistle struck, stopping fast breaks, killing momentum, and handing the Aces free points at the line. The breaking point? Coach Stephanie White desperately signaling for a challenge on a pivotal foul against Boston, only to be stonewalled in front of the world. The referees ignored her. Play went on. The Aces drilled a three-pointer that flipped the entire game on its head. The crowd inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse erupted in fury. Social media lit up instantly with one unshakable verdict: we were robbed. And for anyone watching, the conclusion was unavoidable. This didn't just feel unfair, it felt fixed. This was the hostile storm the league and its referees had created. And into that storm stepped a player who, by all accounts, shouldn't even have been on the floor. Lexie Hull was officially listed as questionable. She was nursing a brutal back injury, one that had limited her in practice and made her movements look stiff even during warm-ups. She even admitted, "I'm a little sore. Not gonna lie, it's catching up to me." The expectation? Maybe a few token minutes. A quick breather for the starters before heading back to the bench with ice packs. But what happened next is why this story matters. Lexie Hull didn't just play. She went to war. She turned what should have been a footnote into the main headline of the night. While the whistle seemed hell-bent on handing Vegas the game, Lexie was trying to rip it right back. She posted a stat line that would be impressive for a fully healthy player: 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. But anyone who actually watched knows. The numbers don't even scratch the surface. This wasn't a stat line. It was a statement. Every time the Fever needed a stop, there she was, diving on the hardwood for a loose ball. Every time the Aces tried to build separation, she answered with one of her 3 momentum-saving triples, jolting the arena back to life. She was visibly hurting, wincing with every movement, but still boxing out bigger bodies, still fighting for every possession as if her career depended on it. This was a player refusing to be erased by the script the referees were writing. This was grit made flesh. And the performance was so raw, so undeniable, that it cut straight through the noise of the controversy. By the final buzzer, one truth was clear. Lexie Hull wasn't supposed to be the story, but she forced her way into it. And her defiance didn't end when the game clock hit 0. And it didn't stop when the game ended. The fire carried straight into the post-game press conference, and this is where we hit the heart of our story. Lexie Hull called out the WNBA. Now, she didn't storm the podium or start screaming about corruption. That's not her style. And frankly, it would have triggered an instant fine from the league office, something the Fever have become all too familiar with this season. Instead, she played it smarter, sharper, more surgical. When asked about the physicality of the game and a particular foul called against her, she said this: "Just trying to defend as hard as I can, and there's only certain screens you're allowed to set. So, just trying to trail them, and that's all I can really say." Let's break that down. That first line, "only certain screens you're allowed to set," wasn't a throwaway. That was a scalpel, a direct reference to the illegal screens and moving picks the Aces were gifted all night long. And the second part, "that's all I can really say," that's the dagger. That's her telling us, without telling us, that she's under a gag order. That players are muzzled when it comes to officiating. It was a masterclass in communication. Polite, professional, and absolutely damning. So what do you think? Was that just a player carefully towing the company line? Or was that a calculated sniper shot from a veteran who knew exactly how to expose the system without taking a fine? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear where you stand. Here's the bigger point. That moment, combined with her on-court heroics, elevated Lexie Hull from gutsy performance to true leader. She didn't just play through pain, she spoke truth through it. But here's the thing, her comments weren't just about one game, and they weren't an isolated flare-up. What happened to Hull and the Fever wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of something much bigger spreading across the league. And another legendary figure was about to give it a name. Because while Hull's jab was subtle, another voice went nuclear. After her own team was eliminated in a series drenched in controversy, Minnesota Lynx coach Cheryl Reeve was asked about the refereeing in the semifinals. Her answer wasn't just a complaint. It was an indictment. It wasn't just a critique. It was an indictment of the entire WNBA leadership. Cheryl Reeve, a championship-winning coach and one of the most respected voices in the game, dropped the hammer. According to an insider report, here's what she said: "For the leadership to deem those 3 people semifinals playoff worthy is in malpractice." Let that sink in. Malpractice. That's not a word you toss around casually. That's a legal term for gross negligence, for professional failure. This wasn't a coach being salty after a loss. This was one of the brightest basketball minds alive, accusing the league office of being so incompetent, so reckless, that they were sabotaging the integrity of their own product, right in the middle of its most important showcase. Reeves' comment ripped the curtain wide open. What happened to Lexie Hull and the Fever wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. It was the direct byproduct of a system that coaches, players, and fans now openly believe is broken and negligently managed at the very top. And here's the thing. Reeves' accusation validates every fan screaming rigged on Twitter. It validates every player fined for daring to speak out. It proves the robbery in Game 3 wasn't paranoia. It was the reality of a corrupted system. Because once you connect Reeves' malpractice charge to Indiana's season as a whole, a disturbing pattern emerges. You already know this if you've been following the Fever all year. This wasn't their first brush with the league's crosshairs. Questionable calls have followed them since opening night. And whenever players like Caitlin Clark or Sophie Cunningham, so much is hinted about officiating on social media. Instant fines. The message from the top couldn't be clearer. Sit down. Shut up. Take the calls we give you. But here's the problem. The Fever don't play that way. They're young. They're scrappy. They're fearless. And they weren't about to be pushed into silence. That's why Game 3 wasn't an isolated incident. It was the boiling point. The moment all of that bottled up frustration exploded onto the national stage. So how did the WNBA respond to the backlash? To the outrage, the trending hashtags, the narrative slipping out of their control? This is where incompetence turns into arrogance. Because according to insider reports, when the league assigned officials for the do-or-die Game 4, they doubled down. They sent out the exact same crew, the very referees at the center of the Game 3 scandal, the same officials already under fire for disputed calls across the playoffs. Think about the audacity of that move. Faced with overwhelming criticism, fans crying foul, coaches openly accusing them of malpractice, the league had a choice. They could have acknowledged the outrage. They could have corrected course. Instead, they doubled down. It was a defiant message to Stephanie White, to Lexie Hull, and to every Fever fan. We hear you. And we don't care. By assigning the same officials for Game 4, the league wasn't just ignoring the noise. They were daring Indiana to beat the same stacked deck all over again. But here's the twist. That arrogance backfired in spectacular fashion. They thought the pressure would break the Fever. They thought the injustice would shatter Lexie Hull. Instead, it forged her. The league's malpractice failed to erase her. It immortalized her. Because in creating an unfair environment, they forced her to dig deeper, fight harder, and show the world just how unbreakable her will truly was. The story stopped being about a rigged game. It became about the rise of a warrior who refused to be erased. They wanted to control the narrative, but what they created was a legend. Lexie Hull didn't just win over fans that night. She became a symbol of grit, fairness, and defiance. She carved her name into Indiana Fever history as a cornerstone of the franchise, not in spite of the league's attempts to bury her, but because of them. The WNBA may have tried to steal her moment, but in doing so, they gave her something far greater, immortality. So now we ask you, what's the real story of this playoff saga? The team that technically won the game, or the player who won the respect of the entire league by refusing to quit? Drop your verdict in the comments below. This controversy is far from over, and we'll be tracking every ripple from the league office. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because the next chapter in this investigation is coming. And finally, if you know a fan who values grit, heart, and a player who leaves it all on the hardwood, share the story with them. They deserve to know the truth behind Lexie Hull's masterpiece.